experiences. I had the same challenges with job interviews. And I was diagnosed with autism in 1982 at age 7. When I was diagnosed, there's only one in every 10,000 children were diagnosed with autism. Now it's one in every 36 children. I also did not experience gainful employment until age 33, and I just celebrated 16 years of working in the mental health field, gainfully employed, 20 years as a professor of theology, 3 traditionally published books, 2 in Barnes and Noble, and a 4th book that's going to be in Barnes and Noble out in March on adulting on the spectrum. And only 3% of people are gainfully employed or on the autism spectrum. And I think a big reason is what your film brings out is the hindrance is society's misconception of autism and also Hollywood's misconception of autism also. I like how you guys have created a better understanding of autism, the challenges we experience in life, and also what it's really like to be on autism. That you met one person with autism, you met one person with autism. And my first question I'd really like to ask you, Bill, is what sparked your interest in acting?
Wow, that's a really good question. And first of all, I would like to say thank you for, I'm glad the film was inspirational to you and glad it spoke to your experiences. For me, like what got me into acting was to cope with being bullied after being bullied like pretty badly in 6th grade. It it was pretty hard and acting was something that just helped me well cope. And I guess acting is technically masking is well just well acting. I don't know another way to put it other than that. But
Yeah, that's good.
yeah.
Yeah.
But acting has like entertainment in general. When I was younger, I always liked to make people like I always liked the thought of making people smile and just bring them into a world where I could just tell them my stories. And I didn't think I'd be able to do that when I was like a little kid, just playing with my dolls and just showing like my friends, like, hey, look at this cool story we can do. We're doing this for fun, and now we're doing it for real. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. And Sue Ann, how did your parents empower you to cultivate your passion into a career?
Uh, my parents didn't really empower that. I don't think anybody wanted me to act besides, my mom was very clear that I was very different from a young age. And I was born in 79, so I lived through the 80s. And so she would take the time to groom me and make sure that I behaved in a normal way and could fit in. And so it's that's what I thought the point of life was. The point of life was to be able to like act and mimic my way through every type of scenario. And it was very difficult. It was very challenging. I love that you work in mental health. Because I did not want to be here by the time I was 15 years old. It was brutal to try to fit into a world and classrooms and societies that I was just different. I was very different from the other kids. So, and then my dad, he and I are very similar, which makes sense. He's an aerospace engineer, and it's so easy to hang out with him, probably because we are so similar. He spins in circles. He has very intense special interests and hyper focus. I mean, but it was like he never expected me to be something different than who I am. So in that way, anytime I hang out with my father, it was a relief because I didn't have this feeling of like, oh my God, here I am. I have to behave differently or something bad's gonna happen.
And Bill, you have 2 siblings on the spectrum.
I do.
What age were you diagnosed with autism? And also, what is your autistic joy? Like, what makes you feel fully alive?
Well, like my siblings are both autistic, Kennedy and Alex. They animated the end credits of um the end, like you see the little animations. Uh that was done by them, and we wanted to include that because, well, that's something they're both really good at. They love to animate. That's what their passion is. For me, it's different forms of art. I love music. I love drawing. I might not be like a good animator, but I know how to like sketch stuff out, and I always love drawing characters and writing stories. And writing in general is honestly one of my favorite things to do. Like, heck, like sometimes I'll just like go on like a Discord and like chat with my friends and like just talk about our stories together, and or just role play, because I think what just got me into storytelling was just sharing it with my friends. Storytelling is something that's always been in my family, something I've always seen. Like, stories have a way of shaping our view on the world, and I think that's meaningful, honestly.
So with me, my autistic joy is this prairie dog, prairie pup. Had almost no communication ability. In age 7, my mom bought Prairie Pup, and in 2002, he met Muhammad Ali. He's gone on to meet Jose Canseco. He's even met Screech from Saved by the Bell. And a lot of times, our autistic joys, I tell people, they open up not only special interests that we have, but it also communication ability. And that's how I learned to communicate with this stuffed animal prairie pup. And he's been everywhere in person, from Madagascar 2002 to Israel in 2012. And
Ah,
then Sue, and did you also experience bullying as a child?
Yes. First of all, you were in Madagascar. That's amazing. I want to hear what I love traveling. I love travel. Yes, because I mean, I would have kids literally come and talk in front of me as if I wasn't present. So they would talk about me, like standing right here, as if I didn't exist. And I hated it. I hated it. And if I got really upset, I lost my ability to speak and use my words. And I couldn't understand why other children didn't treat me the same, or why I was the brunt of really cruel jokes. It was like people would laugh if someone's like, "Oh, why don't you invite Sue Ann to your birthday party?" And I'm talking about from elementary school, and um and then other kids would be like, why are you inviting her? So my entire I just didn't want to be myself anymore. And by the time I was 15, 14, I did everything I could to try to copy and mimic other girls, and find ways not to be myself, which is probably what I love. Because if you show up a certain way, and I really relate to not being able to get a job unless you fit or could pass as the part, right? That's really important. So, yeah, that was that was a little personal pitch.
So what motivated you to work together to make Once More Like Rain Man? And how long did it take you to produce this short film?
good question. Uh, I remember going on a lot of auditions, because some of the auditions are actually based on actual scripts that I gotten. And I remember going on several auditions for autistic characters, but also non-autistic characters, and noticing the differences that, hey, why are they making an autistic character feel like someone else's character growth or character development, but not giving that character the same kind of treatment? It's like they're more so of an obstacle instead of an actual character. And I also kind of noticed, when I've been on auditions, like the way the scripts are written and the way their special interests are done, it's more so misinformed. And that doesn't mean like they like dislike people on the spectrum. It's just more so that they don't really know how to genuinely portray autism, because perhaps they've either never met someone who's actually autistic, or don't know exactly how to write it because they haven't met people with autism. And I remember writing the script with my parents and just writing all the kind of general stuff out. And I remember when we wanted to like find a director, had to be someone on the spectrum, and Suzanne actually referred us to Suanne, and that's kind of how we met. Like we just clicked right away, and it kind of everything else just fell into place after that. It was honestly great, and I'm glad that we were able to just get everything out there and just share the message that we want to convey, because being autistic, it doesn't like define you. Like just because like you're autistic, some people define it like as like they confuse disability with inability, but that's not true. Just because you're autistic doesn't mean you can't do something, and you can do it both behind the camera and on camera, and you can tell the stories you want to tell. If you're like you have like ADHD or like different types of like um disabilities, like it doesn't matter like that you have that, just as long as you have that determination and passion to do what you love to do. I think that's the most important part, because if you love your project, you love your work, and you want to share it with others, and if you have the determination and the passion to bring that into reality, then I know that there's a lot of like-minded people out there that will love it just as much as you.
And I heard this quote years ago. I interviewed a guy on the autism spectrum who was an author, and he said this. He said, my dad told me to get a job where I'd never get fired for sexual harassment, never get fired for saying anything inappropriate. So I got the perfect job. I got a job at a funeral home where all the clients are dead. And what challenges do you experience with autism, and how these affected or impacted auditions? Like that young guy, his filtering affected his job interviews. So how has your autism affected auditions, would you say?
My autism like has definitely helped me with auditions, because I'm able to, well, I'm pretty observant and I always have been. It's kind of like the same like how I've always been. Because when I was younger, like when my siblings were getting ABA therapy, little me decided I wanted nothing to do with it
Yeah.
because of how observant I was. And I just kind of, um, when I'm reading different characters and reading into different traits, I'm able to piece different parts of my own personality and my own personal experiences into those characters. Even if they're like completely nothing like me. Like it doesn't matter if they're a mean girl, or like doesn't matter if like they're like an evil villain, or like the daughter of a supervillain, or so on and so forth. Just as long as I'm able to piece at least one aspect of like myself into that character when auditioning, or just bringing a new take into what's already written, then that's enough. uh,
And then Sue Ann, what are some autistical stereotypes you hope to dispel once more, like Rain Man? And you've been in this industry quite a while now, and that you've seen.
I don't typically audition for characters on the spectrum. I think the closest thing was, David Fincher's remake of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, in where Lisbeth Salander has Asperger's, right? And so I was reading for the role of Miriam Wu, and I had to fly back from New York City. And that's when I read the book, and I was like, that's so strange. I'm completely like Lisbeth Salander. So my journey's been long. It's been very long, and I think this is very true of a lot of women on the autism spectrum. As the studies have been done, I think a lot of girls are missed, which is why I was drawn to the script, that it was written by young Bella, right? And I know, especially in my community, the Asian community, it's much more prevalent. Like my best friend, she has, we were wild. We got in so much trouble when we were teenagers, and she has a son now who's on the autism spectrum. And she goes, because of our time together, I understand him so much better. Whereas when I was growing up, it was just like, what is wrong with you? It was like, I think, you could look at a lot of stories from the older generations. I think I was mute until maybe like 4 or 5, and then I was hyperverbal, like complete. And it was like,
Mhm.
so they gave me like the school's principal award for most improved, because within months I was like speaking, I was hyperlexic, so I spoke really at a higher level than anybody thought, suddenly. So these things, and like, I think it's really interesting to be able to see characters that are going to be very different, vast and varied. One of the things I love is there's this book called The Reason I Jump. And you see people using AAC typing, right? Just because somebody's nonverbal. Like I said, if I get really stressed out or overstimulated, I may lose my language abilities to speak, but there's nothing, my intellectual capacity, I was tested very highly gifted from a young age. So it's not like I'm not aware, like Bella says, of everything that is happening around me. And I think there's a lot of situations and scenarios where that can be unfortunate if a person who's autistic is put in the wrong scenario, either at work or in the public. I think there's some horror stories we've heard of encounters with police, and I think it's important to have autistic people start to speak out about, here's what happens, you know, in this scenario of situation, how I can be best supported, what my coworkers, my friends, my family can step in and do, which I love, because Bella's like in the script, she's like, why would her dad like yell at her if she's already like stressed out? That's like the last thing you want to do, because some people in the spectrum could be hypersensitive to emotional states, especially coming from other people, right? It's like you just, so these things were really cool to be able to film and express, and hopefully open up worlds and create characters that aren't necessarily just autistic, but are just, it's a feature of humanity. And let's see it on screen, right? We have never
Yeah.
seen it in the past, besides, in certain stereotypes. And we're going to break these stereotypes up.
I was going to say our development, it's not like linear. It's more like a jack and box. Dun, dun, dun. You're trying all kinds of things. Dun, dun, dun. You're not saying anything. Dun, dun, dun. All of a sudden, you're speaking in full sentences because pop goes the autism. And that's how mine was too. I use that in all the teaching. I'm going to be speaking to 600 educators on education on Wednesday. And that's one of the illustrations I use in it because that's very common. And then, Bill, how did you choose the title of your film?
Good question. How I chose the title Once More Like Rain Man was actually because without Rain Man as a film, ABA therapy and the treatment that autism people get today wouldn't have been made. I remember my parents said I was part of like a pilot program when I was pretty young because they wanted to see if they could interfere much sooner rather than like at the age they did with my siblings, which was, I'd say 3, 4. But that doesn't mean that Rain Man within itself is a bad film. It's the first step that people took to seeing autistic people in a different light, and people on this like on the spectrum in general in a different light. And I'd say like if Rain Man had the services that we have today, like I know he'd do much better, that character. And honestly, like I genuinely, I gosh, this is a really tricky question. Okay.
Yeah, that's
I think the reason why I chose that film is because it was the first step. Like that's why I chose to include it in the title, is because it was the first step, and we hope to take the next step in Hollywood, because we don't want to make it just a stereotype, because people decided to just stay stagnant and make it a stereotype. But just because you've met one person with autism means you've only met one person with autism on the spectrum. And it's true, like some people can be hypersensitive, or with my brother, like he can be hyposensitive. Like there's funny stories with that, especially at ice skating. Like when we were younger, like mom would put us in sports that would help us stimulate, like because we would spin a lot, and she put us in a sport that spinning a lot without getting dizzy was a skill, like because I don't get dizzy, and in ice skating that's a pretty good skill. And I think just showing that, hey, the stereotype like this was a good first step, but we do need to move forward with everything that's going on. And I think it's also because I haven't really seen myself in it yet. Like, yeah, like I've related to many characters before, especially like with video games and different types of shows, especially animated shows. But it is important to show people like myself that, hey, there's a character like you, and it's in a story that's just as cool. And it's the character's not somebody else's character development. The character's their own character with flaws and just as human as any other character. That went on with a bit of a ramble, but that is most like that definitely why I chose the title Once Upon a Time.
And I often get asked, what was my experience like with autism? Then people think of Rain Man, being able to count all those toothpicks, the 400, or Forrest Gump, someone who can tell their life story on a bench. But mine is actually like this seal here, the unfortunate seal, Sally the seal. In 1989, Exxon Valdez hired this drunken sailor named Joseph to carry 54 million gallons of crude oil across Prince William Sound. It hit an iceberg, 54 million gallons of crude oil, 11 million of those gallons covered the coastline. They spent $2 billion in 6 months cleaning up the coastline. Then Exxon realized they forgot one key ingredient, the wildlife, but Sally the seal, who were victimized by it. So they decided to pick one lucky seal. They spent $10,000 rehabilitating her, getting her well. The big day came when they were using her to raise funds to clean up the rest of the wildlife. They built her a water slide so she could go slipping in the sea. And out of nowhere, a killer whale came, and Sally the seal became Sally the meal. And that's my experience with autism, with Sally the meal. I got eaten up, and spit out. In fact, I got severely bullied. A guy stole a tarantula who'd end up being a running back for Ohio State University, and someone dared me to make a tarantula stew out of it. So I took a shot put and made tarantula stew, and I got hit in the eye. So that's why Sally the meal would be a good title for a lot of us on the autism spectrum who were bullied, like you, Sue Ann, and also Bella.
Well, we all learned something today, and that is that seal eaten by orca.
Yeah.
And children being traumatized by said event.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess we all have a little backstory.
And Sue Ann, what are some misconceptions you see in Hollywood about autism and what we're able to do?
Oh man. Well, I was lucky that I got to work with Jason Katims, for As We See It, because he's obviously someone who's a veteran creator, Emmy award winning, but he also has very personal experience that he crafted, and based the characters a lot about what Rick, myself, and Albert brought to them. So that was incredible to see, you know, but otherwise, I mean, I thought, like Bella said, I loved Rain Man. I'm a product of the 80s, and some of the best movies were from that era. And so for me, it blew my mind seeing Dustin Hoffman's portrayal, and obviously Tom Cruise as his brother. And it was powerful, it was moving, and there was no way that's me. There was no way I'm autistic, right? Because I was not Rain Man. I was completely opposite. I was, you know, very hyper. I was much more like a boy. I was sensitive to loud noises or sounds, but so you know, like I had, if I wanted to do something, I didn't have always like a logical sense of like, you people don't do this. I was very blunt, very literal, very honest, rule follower. So for me, it was really important that like if everybody had to stay in line to go to the water fountain to drink water, like if somebody cut in front of me, I would be livid. That because that was like you can't not break the rules like that. So these were the things that were triggers for me from a very young age. Like if something was very unfair. Like you, I love animals. I love wildlife. Absolutely. I feel very comfortable amongst animals and wildlife and our environment. So I never saw myself. My mom didn't see people like me, and she couldn't figure it out. She was like, something's wrong with Suanne. You know, I was hypersensitive to sound, so I could hear her talking about me when I was upstairs and she's downstairs. And she was just like telling my aunt there's something wrong with me, but she couldn't figure out what it was. And so her way of being a good mom, you know, in the 80s was to groom me and make sure I could just pass regularly, right? Like, look at me in the face and smile. Like she had to teach me all these mannerisms, which I guess is ABA therapy, right? Which is now what,
Yeah.
you know, doesn't usually work for autistic people because it's like trying to force natural what neurotypical people decide is natural behavior that can really stress out autistic people. Like there's nothing wrong with, like, you know, singing is probably a stim. I'm wondering if that's a stim for Bella as well, because I know Bella loves to sing. It's very beautifully relaxing, just some melodic, yeah.
I got a
Yeah.
guy mad the other day. I was doing rounds with the patients and I'm singing, should have been a cowboy rather than a PCS. And it woke the guy up. So I can understand that.
Yep. Mind blindness, like not knowing, like that other people, like it took a long time to learn these things, right? You know, I used to think that
Yeah.
if I couldn't see someone, they couldn't see me because I couldn't, or like if I left the room, everybody just disappeared. I didn't understand that people kept on existing like separately outside of myself. So these were things that took a long time to grow into as an adult. Which, Ron, I'm curious about your book. Amazing that you wrote a book in Barnes and Noble about adulting.
And you got to hear this.
Yeah.
Hootie Inc. wrote the foreword for my third book, Views from the Spectrum in the Life and Fate of Your Neurodivergent Child. And it actually had to do with Rain Man. I'll give you that clue.
Who?
Dr. Trefford, who developed the character Raymond Bobbitt. He was the one who used Kim Peck to make the character Raymond Bobbitt. And he wrote the foreword right before he died and went on to heaven.
Amazing. That is so amazing. I can't
And
wait to
he
read
mentored under Leo Kanner, the guy who came up with the word autism. And autism is a Koine Greek word that means autos or self-absorbed.
mm. That's cool. Your book looks beautiful.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
So pretty. And the colors are
And then Bella, if you could develop the ideal character to portray in a film or series, who would that character be and what attributes would they have?
very good question. I've never had one like that. I think. Well, if it's a character like similar to myself, chaotic is definitely a word I describe myself a lot. Someone who's very interested in multiple forms of art and just different forms of media and just breaking it down and just talking about it and seeing the stories for like all its themes and narratives, because that's something I love to do, like with every form of media. I love reading a lot of stuff. I love um, writing a lot of stuff. I love drawing a lot of stuff. I love drawing expressions for characters, especially. So they definitely would be an artist. And if anyone asks me like what my favorite little challenges are when it comes to art, it's those expression sheets. I'm like, give me expression sheets and I will draw like the entire day or something. Because I don't know, like they're always fun to do. It's always fun to like see what I can push and stretch like with different characters and different expressions and what kind of things I can do with such an expression, because expressions are very fun, especially like in acting yourself, because the camera is very sensitive to how you express yourself. And like you have to be more subtle because it picks up on very, very subtle things. So I guess in a way I apply my acting skills to my artwork. Uh, but also like with music, like I love music as well, and I love breaking down different types of music. I love listening to music from video game soundtracks or anime, or just watching animated films. I remember watching like Studio Ghibli's a couple Studio Ghibli films, like Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle. Um, what else? Ponyo, I think, is another one. I haven't seen many of them, but beautifully animated. I love seeing just animated stuff come to life. Kind of like how I love seeing stories come to life in general, because that's kind of how I always viewed acting. As an actress, in a way, my job is to bring the character itself to life, to add on to the story with my own take on the character. And if that fits with the narrative and the story and how I portray the character, then it makes a character that people can relate to. It makes a character that people can get attached to and love just as much as any other character.
So I loved binge watching As We See It, and I could totally relate to Violet's meltdowns, and I have them too. And I call mine my honey badger moments. This is the first honey badger I got. I actually got him on my honeymoon to the Windy City in Chicago 12 years ago. But what I didn't realize when I bought this one, if I press the paw, I'm not going to press it, every F-bomb in the book comes out, even more F-bombs than you were using in Once More Like Rain Man. So what I did is I've gotten, from when I speak, my mascot is a prairie dog and honey badger. Is this one who's declawed from Amazon, because if he goes off, I don't want people thinking I'm having a live demonstration of a meltdown, especially in a large church with all those F-bombs. They wouldn't understand. They make me repent. So my question is, did you experience meltdowns too, Violet, like I've experienced, or I mean, Sue Ann, like Violet, your character in As We See It?
Yeah, especially from a very young age, it was like very hard. It's a very like, it was like, because school was so difficult, right? And then I think my mom had a really hard time. She didn't have a lot of support, so she was a single mom. And she was very stressed out, and she usually brought that stress home if she thought she was going to get laid off. And so living in an environment that wasn't calm or peaceful was overwhelming. And because the schoolyard was already so overwhelming with, especially if there was like, that's why I put that line in there where the casting associate, when Bella's character is having a meltdown at the audition, she looks at her and she goes, "You're not even on the list," because a lot of these microaggressions towards autistic people get absorbed, right? It's not like we don't know that somebody doesn't like us, doesn't want us around, is talking about us, or just mean, right? Like sometimes, you have a teacher and she's just mean, she doesn't like you. Like, I don't know if any of you guys experienced that. I did. So there's certain environments and people that we're going to thrive with that are different, and yeah, I think that's also important. Sometimes I don't think the meltdowns happen in a vacuum.
I had one.
Continue.
Oh, I've never missed a day of work in my life. And on December 26, 2014, I had a fever of 104 and bronchitis. And I came in and I knew if they took my temperature, I'd be able to go home and my streak would continue. So the supervisor calls someone, he goes, I can't believe this guy would come in with 104 fever. And the other supervisor says he has Asperger's or autism. And he says, yeah, that's a real ass.
What?
And I thought of that, how people just misunderstand us sometimes. But we want that routine. So that's why I showed up even with 104.5 fever.
Yeah. By the way, autistic people are always off book. Don't ever miss their auditions, appointments. If they say they're going to be somewhere at one time, like the best workers, you can literally be so reliable. Like I totally relate. Like I would work until my body would just pass out when I was younger. I didn't understand. Like because we are so routine based, and so this is our job. We're going to show up. We're going to do it. So I think that, I think there's something to said about putting autistic people into the workforce, and what they're actually up against is the politics side of things. There's a lot of people who don't do their jobs very well, and they don't care, and they're mean, and they get ahead by throwing other people under the bus. And there's a whole population of those out in the world, especially in entertainment. You have to be careful. It's very obvious, you see people like that. And I think when you have autistic teams, you're going to get so much more productivity and efficiency because they show up, they do what they're going to do, and you could just rely on them.
We ended early every day during shooting. I remember that very clearly. Like we ended early every day because we knew what we were doing. We knew I was off book with the whole script. I remember like they kept asking if I wanted to see my lines, but I didn't know what they were talking about. And then like they just showed me the little mini script. I'm like, it's a little baby script. I didn't know this was a thing.
Thank you for that, Bella.
I've noticed the key to our success is having people who believed in us, empowered us to market and refine our gifts. And who has been able to do that for you and really refine and market your gifts as actresses?
Good question. I'd say my family and my friends. I have some friends who are also autistic, and when I've shown them some stuff about what I was working on, I know that they related to what I was doing, what I showed. And I know my friends mean a lot to me. Like, I remember dealing with a lot of stress in 11th grade. And like Sue Ann, they were just talking at me or around me. And well, I had to cope in spite of these. Well, to put it lightly, they're just jerks that just kept using me for the system because of USD. They kind of that's a whole other story, but point is my family, my friends, they mean the world. And I love them very dearly. And same with just anyone that I cared about. They're a big inspiration. And sometimes I write things that I know and things that remind me of the people that I do care about. And some things that I just want to see in me. And as an actress, I really like doing that. It's probably one of the things that make me, well, Bella, I guess, for lack of. I'm not sure if it's the same for Sue Ann, but I know for a fact that bringing stories to life and sharing with other people who love seeing my life is what motivates me as an actress, as someone who loves to create. What about you?
And I want to thank you so much, Bella and Sue Ann, for letting me interview you and share your insight into Hollywood and autism. And I'd love to come out to Los Angeles sometime. I've been to almost every state, but I haven't been to California. And when I come, I'll bring the unrated honey badger and also prairie pup and my whole cast is cruise of animals. And thanks so much.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks.
Bella. Thanks, Stephanie. Bye, Bella.
Thanks.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Oh, I'm still here. Sorry.